You were never meant to hear this. Close the door, kill the lights, and listen closely, because once I tell you this secret, you'll never see your family the same way again. The Harrow name is still spoken in whispers in the shadows of Virginia's oldest graveyards, a family whose bloodline drips through America's veins like a poison you can't detect until it's too late. You see, the Harrows didn't just own land. They owned secrets. Rituals that turned churches into altars of sacrifice, business deals into blood pacts, and generations of innocent children into offerings for an unseen master that fed on despair. Imagine standing at the edge of their ancestral estate, a rotting mansion hidden deep in the woods, where every creaking floorboard moans with the voices of the missing. Inside those walls, sons betrayed fathers, mothers poisoned daughters, and guests never left alive. Their story isn't written in your history books. It's stitched into the bones buried under old oak trees that still weep in the dark. And tonight, I'm dragging you down that crooked hallway, one locked door at a time, until you see what the Harrow family truly did to America's soul. But be warned, once you see this darkness, you can't crawl back to the light. Now listen, because the first secret is waiting. In 1792, at the edge of a fledgling nation, the first of the Harrow line carved their dominion out of raw wilderness. Jonathan Harrow, a preacher by title but a butcher by appetite, came to the Virginia hills under the guise of salvation. He claimed he could cleanse settlers of their sins, purify their bloodlines for a new world. What he offered instead was a sickness of the mind, a twisted gospel that demanded sacrifice, obedience, and silence. Local folklore says that every sermon he preached ended with a single question whispered into trembling ears. Who will you offer to keep your soul clean? When townsfolk confessed their darkest shames, infidelities, bastard children, debts, Jonathan offered them absolution in exchange for something more than repentance. His followers disappeared into the root cellars beneath the Harrow house, never to be seen again. Some say he buried them alive, others that their bones became mortar for the chapel that still stands, abandoned but humming with a hush you can hear if you stand there at midnight. And as the land prospered, so did the Harrow name. On the surface, pillars of the community, beneath, devourers of it. This was only the beginning, just the first blood poured into the family chalice. But ask yourself now, how deep is your loyalty to your own blood? Would you bury your brother to keep your secrets safe? By the turn of the century, the Harrows had mastered their art. Rituals cloaked as charity, charity cloaked as leverage. In 1821, Eleanor Harrow, Jonathan's only daughter, became the second architect of this dynasty of dread. Unlike her father's fire and brimstone sermons, Eleanor's power lay in her touch. She was a midwife, trusted by mothers, respected by fathers, welcomed into homes that locked their doors to outsiders. She delivered babies by day and chose who would never draw breath by night. Official records show nearly 60 stillbirths under her care in a single decade. But local whispers speak of candles flickering in her attic, of babies who never cried because they were never meant to. Their tiny bones, say the old men at the tavern, are still hidden in the bricked-up walls of the Harrow house nursery. But Eleanor didn't stop there. She understood something her father didn't. True power grows best in silence. She married into rival families, spliced her venom into other bloodlines, like a spider laying eggs. By 1850, half the county's most respectable families were tied to the Harrows by marriage, debt, or disgrace. An invisible web no one could break without unraveling themselves in the process. It's said she kept a ledger hidden in the attic eaves, names, secrets, weaknesses. Find that book, they say, and you'll control every ghost that ever haunted these hills. But no one ever has. Or if they did, they didn't live to tell you where it is. Now lean closer. There's a reason these stories never make it past the county lines. In 1863, when America bled itself dry in civil war, the Harrows fed on the chaos like crows on a battlefield. Men disappeared into Virginia's woods. Deserters, escaped slaves, lost soldiers, only to reappear as rumors of rotting corpses buried under freshly tilled Harrow fields. The family turned war into currency. Jonathan's grandson, Thomas Harrow, made deals with both sides, offering sanctuary to Union defectors and Confederate scouts alike. They all walked into the Harrow barn thinking they'd find safety. Instead, they found a blade behind the neck or poison in the stew. Thomas harvested the gold teeth from dead men's mouths, stripped them of boots, rifles, anything of worth. By the end of the war, he'd amassed enough wealth to buy judges, sheriffs, and silence. You want to know how they got away with it? They didn't just hide the bodies. They made the survivors complicit. Locals who stumbled on mass graves were offered hush money or found themselves on the wrong side of a loaded musket. Some say the ghosts of those soldiers still march through the orchard at dusk, boots crunching on fallen apples, searching for throats to choke in revenge. Tell me, do you feel it? That cold hand brushing the back of your neck right now? That's history tapping you on the shoulder, asking if you really want to keep listening. You do, don't you? After the blood and gold of the war years, the Harrow name should have rotted in the ground with the bodies they buried. But power doesn't decay when it's fed fresh secrets, and Thomas Harrow knew that better than any man alive in post-war Virginia. With his blood money, he did what all predators do when the hunt grows risky. He put on a mask. He became a philanthropist. He built the Harrow School for Wayward Boys in 1871. An orphanage, they called it, but locals knew better. Mothers whispered that if you lost your child to fever or famine, you could bury them in the churchyard, or you could hand them over to the Harrows and pray they'd be raised clean. But no one ever asked what happened behind the school's brick walls after the oil lamps flickered out. Teachers who tried to speak found themselves without tongues, literally in one case. Children who ran never made it past the orchard fence. And those boys? They were fed, yes. Clothed, yes. Taught. Not exactly. They were groomed, turned into loyal shadows for the family's darker errands. Some were sent away with new names, placed into banks, newspapers, city councils. Others stayed closer to home, filling shallow graves behind the dormitory if they failed to obey. The Harrow School was no charity. It was a factory, stamping out silence, fear, and servitude like coins from a mold. And the profits? They came from blackmail, child labor, and selling off the brightest boys to the highest bidder, lawyers, judges, men who needed pliable sons to do their dirty work. When the state finally came calling, the ledgers were clean, the witnesses gone. The building conveniently burned to its foundations one rainy spring night. But the ashes still whisper if you stand in that field alone. Not every child was buried. Some still watch. So look over your shoulder tonight. You might see one standing at the tree line, waiting for you to remember their name. But the Harrows didn't just thrive in the shadows of the South. By the 1890s, they understood that true power required a new disguise, a face that the rising American empire would welcome with open arms. Enter William Harrow II, Thomas's eldest son, a man with a preacher's voice and a banker's handshake. He took the family's black heart and dressed it in a velvet glove, moving north to Washington, D.C. There, he sold the Harrow story as one of triumph. Pioneers turned philanthropists, plantation barons turned progressives. He donated stained glass windows to churches he never prayed in, funded libraries whose bookshelves hid secret passages, and hosted charity galas that dripped with champagne, secrets, and fresh recruits. But the most brilliant part, William didn't hoard the Harrow fortune in vaults. He invested it, railroads, coal mines, telegraphs, and behind every check he wrote lay a contract dripping with hidden clauses, land trades, political favors, marriages arranged in the smoky back rooms of gentlemen's clubs. The Harrow bloodline flowed into old money families desperate to keep their titles relevant as America industrialized. They didn't care what darkness stained the gold, as long as they got their share. Meanwhile, those who whispered about missing clerks, vanished accountants, or suspicious fires that erased entire ledgers. They found themselves discredited, bankrupt, or feeding the soil behind the new Harrow Lodge upstate, its grand stone walls echoing with laughter above and muffled screams below. It was the same curse, wrapped in silk instead of burlap. So, I ask you now, what mask are you wearing tonight? And who pulls the strings behind it while you pretend you're free? Now listen. Because here's where the veil slips. Just enough for you to see the rot that still pulses under the marble floors of America's oldest institutions. In 1906, when William Harrow II died in a hunting accident, some say the bullet came from his own brother's rifle, others that it was no accident at all. The family didn't fracture. It multiplied. The sons and daughters he left behind scattered like seeds on poisoned ground, taking their legacy into politics, finance, even the earliest roots of intelligence work. A Harrow cousin advised presidents behind closed doors. Another drafted economic policies that crushed small farmers but fed Wall Street's insatiable hunger. Still, another married into the press, turning headlines into weapons, steering public outrage like cattle to slaughter. The Harrows understood that physical murder was messy, too easy to trace, but kill a man's livelihood, bury his reputation, strangle his future while telling him he's free? That's murder no jury can convict you for, and no priest can absolve. And while they shifted into tailored suits and boardrooms, their ancestral estate, Harrow House, remained a pilgrimage site for the family's inner circle. Every 10 years, like clockwork, they gathered under a harvest moon. No journalists, no staff. Just whispers, wine, and rituals older than the republic they claimed to serve. If you think this is just a story, an old ghost tale, ask yourself this. Why does the estate remain under armed guard to this day, though no Harrow has officially lived there for 50 years? Why do trespassers vanish without a single news report? And why do local maps always mark the property line but never the house itself? Wake up, friend. You're not hearing history. You're hearing your invitation to see how deep the roots really go. They say the deeper you dig in Harrow soil, the more it bleeds. By 1920, the world had changed. Machines roared where horse hooves once clattered. Cities rose like stone towers to the heavens. And men dreamed of fortunes forged by steam and steel. But under all that progress, the Harrows adapted like a parasite slipping into a new host. Edward Harrow III, great-grandson of the first butcher preacher, wore his villainy like a silk tie. He understood the new frontier wasn't farmland or battlefields. It was the human mind. Edward funneled family money into silent investments, psychiatric hospitals, research societies, even early government studies into behavior modification. But these weren't acts of charity. These were labs, underground crucibles where secrets were forged and freedom was dissected like a corpse. Rumors leaked of patients who checked in for mild melancholia and never walked out again. Some said the wards were cover for human experiments. Sleep deprivation, electroshock, re-education. Chemical trials that left men drooling in locked rooms, staring at walls until their wills dissolved like sugar in boiling tea. And who funded it all? Not just the Harrows. Senators, tycoons, industrial barons who saw what Edward saw. If you can control a man's mind, you never need to chain his body. They called it progress. But the orderlies who cleaned the padded cells whispered a darker name for it. Harvesting souls. By 1930, Edward was feeding what he learned to those in power. How do you steer masses toward war? How do you silence dissent before it breathes? How do you make a man betray his neighbor, his brother, himself? The Harrows never needed an army. They built one inside your skull. Now tell me, do you think you're immune to the same tricks? The slogans you repeat, the news you trust, the comforts you cling to. Whose design do you think that is? You think you choose you. The chains? No. The Harrows wrote the blueprint. And you're reading it right now, whether you admit it or not. They don't teach you this in school. They can't. Because if you knew just how much of your reality was stitched together in secret rooms by families like the Harrows, you'd burn your textbooks, and salt the earth they called holy. In the shadow of World War II, Edward's experiments bloomed like poisonous flowers. Soldiers came home broken, shell-shocked, they called it then. The Harrows called it opportunity. They offered treatment funded by quietly siphoned federal dollars. But behind the clinic doors, veterans weren't healed. They were studied, pushed, prodded, broken again, and rebuilt in the Harrow image. Techniques tested on the shell-shocked soon found their way to prisons, poorhouses, orphanages. Do you see the pattern? The weak, the lost, the voiceless. These were always the Harrows' favorite crop. And when the Cold War dawned, they saw their harvest ripen. Fear is the perfect soil for obedience. Edward's files, some still locked in vaults no journalist has ever cracked, fed entire government programs. MK Ultra? They won't say the Harrow name, but you can read between the lines. The chemicals, the hypnosis, the conditioning of unwitting men and women, these were old Harrow tricks, dressed in new lab coats. And when word leaked, when truth clawed its way into the light, it was buried again under layers of redacted pages and national security. They call it a conspiracy theory now, because that's the easiest way to strangle a dangerous truth before it breathes. But tonight you know better. You know some ghosts never rest and some chains never break. And so I ask you, if you're brave enough to keep digging, type "Open the Veil" in the comments below. Type it twice. Once for the world you leave behind, and once for the world you're about to see. Open the veil. Let those words echo inside you like the footsteps that creak in the Harrow attic when no one's home. Because when you speak it twice, you're not just feeding the machine that buries this story, you're feeding the shadow that lifts it instead, spreading this forbidden memory like a contagion the Harrows can't cure. Now listen closer. After Edward's death in 1961, officially from natural causes, though the nurse who found him swore his face looked like it had seen the devil himself, his heirs didn't mourn. They scattered like dark seeds again, each carrying a fragment of the Harrow gospel into new terrain. One son vanished into the hush-hush world of post-war intelligence, helping to build covert programs that shaped regime changes like clay. Another married a senator's daughter and turned family secrets into campaign donations and corporate backroom deals. A third, he didn't run for office or hide behind the walls of power. He stayed right here, in the rotting carcass of Harrow House. Locals called him the groundskeeper. They say he was half mad, eyes like wet glass, always whispering to the locked doors and bricked-up fireplaces. But they laughed too soon. Because the groundskeeper didn't need money or influence, he kept the family's oldest rights alive. Every so often, when the leaves turned red and the wind carried a certain smell of copper and moss, people went missing. Hitchhikers, drifters, curious college kids who thought trespassing on Harrow soil would earn them bragging rights. They never bragged. And if you stand at the iron gates tonight, you'll see a flicker, an old oil lamp swinging through the orchard, looking for the next trespasser to make sure the Harrow legacy never runs dry. Keep your eyes open now, because the next door we're unlocking was never meant to swing wide for outsiders. By the 1970s, the groundskeeper had become more myth than man. Locals swore he was just a cautionary tale to scare teenagers away from the crumbling Harrow estate. But old deputies, men who'd worked the county roads for decades, tell a different story in hushed voices at the diner counter just before dawn. They speak of search parties that turned up boot prints circling the orchard but never crossing the fence, of shallow depressions in the woods where the earth seemed to breathe, soft, as if something beneath waited for permission to rise again. One deputy, long retired now, told his grandson about the night he swore he saw the groundskeeper standing in the middle of the family cemetery, shovel in hand, digging up bones that were supposed to rest forever. When the deputy called out, the figure turned, face hidden behind a burlap mask, shoulders draped in something that looked like a priest's cassock stitched from animal hides. The thing didn't run. It just tilted its head, like a wolf scenting a wounded lamb, then stepped back into the fog and was gone. No one believed him, of course, but not long after, The deputy's cruiser was found abandoned on the edge of Harrowland, engine still warm, driver's side door open, shotgun missing from its rack. They found the car, but never him. And in the years that followed, rumors sprouted like weeds. The orchard wasn't just an orchard, it was a garden of offerings. The groundskeeper tended it not with water and sunlight, but with fear and flesh. Every generation needs its shepherd. The Harrows knew this, and while their heirs smiled on television screens and signed trade bills, the real work was done in secret groves where roots wrap around bones like fingers around a throat. So I ask you again, do you still think you're safe because your doors are locked? The Harrows never needed keys to slip into your head. While the groundskeeper kept the rituals burning in the woods, the rest of the bloodline sank deeper into the machinery of the new America. The 1980s were an age of suits and handshakes, of deregulation and leveraged buyouts. Perfect camouflage for a family that feasted on manipulation. Vincent Harrow, cousin to the groundskeeper, wore $1,000 watches and grinned for Wall Street cameras. He wasn't content to buy up land or stock. He bought minds. Vincent funded think tanks, those polished institutions that spoon-feed politicians data to justify policies that bleed the working man dry. He funded medical research that turned addiction into profit, pushing pills that numbed generations while lobbyists made sure no cure would ever be truly found. He bought news anchors, columnists, and spin doctors who turned every scandal into background noise. If the old Harrows were butchers of bodies, Vincent was a butcher of will. And here's the part that should chill your spine. He didn't hide it. He bragged about his power in coded jokes at charity galas. His favorite line was, "We don't own people, we lease them. Monthly interest, lifelong payments." The men who laughed with him at those banquets now run your pension funds, sit on university boards, and nod solemnly on TV while telling you what you should fear next. The groundskeeper planted bodies. Vincent planted ideas. Both rotted you from the inside out. And while you traded your rage for cheap comforts, the Harrows bought the silence that keeps you docile. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly chose anything? Your job, your debt, your dreams. Look closer, and you'll see the watermark. Harrow. Ink. If you're still with me, you've tasted enough poison to feel the shift in your bones, like waking up to find a hidden door in your childhood home and realizing it was never locked. By the late 90s, the family's modern patriarch, Adrian Harrow, figured out the final piece of the puzzle. Flesh was weak, secrets got sloppy, even hush money could fail if enough light crept in. But digital shadows, now that was eternal. Adrian took the family's wealth and poured it into the networks you worship every day. You think your data belongs to you? That your online life is a quilt of free choices and private whispers? Adrian laughed at that illusion. He bought up data brokers, invested in algorithms before you even knew what the word meant. Behind the glowing screens in your pocket, behind the smiling avatars and tailored ads, there's a garden. Just like the groundskeeper's orchard, but vaster, deeper, infinite. Every click, every fear, every confession you share under the glow of midnight is a seed they plant. They cultivate you like crops, predict your anger, feed it back to you until you can't tell your own voice from the echo they programmed. You rage exactly when they want you to. You kneel exactly when they say you should. And all the while the family tree blooms, new branches grafted from your surrender. They don't bury you under old oak trees anymore. They bury you under layers of consent you never meant to sign. So tell me now, what's left of you that they don't already own? And what would you sacrifice to take even a shred of it back? They say the final stage of control is when the cage becomes invisible, when the prisoner defends the bars he can no longer see. Adrian Harrow perfected this illusion. By the early 2000s, he understood that if you can make people believe they're being heard, they'll shout their secrets willingly. Social media, they called it. A new pulpit for a digital age. But for the Harrows, it was the same old chapel with a fresh coat of paint. Remember the Sacred Heart Chapel on the Oregon Trail? A sanctuary for the lost, while their souls were siphoned in the dark? Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. It's the same architecture. You come seeking comfort, connection, validation, and in return, you bleed data into the hungry roots beneath your feet. Every post a confession, every like a breadcrumb trail. The Harrows don't need arsenic anymore. They dose you with dopamine instead. Likes and shares drip like morphine into the bloodstream of a generation too distracted to notice the soft manacles tightening. And here's the cruelest brilliance. You build the cage yourself. You decorate it with your selfies, your heartbreaks, your rants about freedom. You polish the bars so they gleam in the sun, while the Harrows harvest your patterns, your triggers, your dreams. Ever wonder why dissent feels so futile now? Why outrage flares hot but burns out fast? Because the platforms feed on your anger, turning it into currency, data, control. And if you push too close to truth, the algorithms choke your reach, drown your voice in static, bury your secrets under trending distractions. You never needed a secret police when the people police themselves. And the Harrows watch it all, hidden behind shell companies, funding think tanks that shape policy, donating to the same senators you blame for your misery. They laugh at you screaming into the void they built, because every echo that dies there feeds the roots of thee. Ear orchard, generation after generation. So now you see it, don't you? The chapel never burned. It just got Wi-Fi. I want you to sit with this next truth, because it's the one that breaks men or reforges them into wolves. The Harrows do not fear exposure. They crave it, just enough to keep your eyes locked on the shadows, while the real blade slips between your ribs in daylight. Conspiracy theorists, whistleblowers, truth channels, the Harrows need them. They feed the illusion that rebellion is possible from the comfort of a desk chair. They let you scream about lizard kings and secret cabals because every absurd story hides the shape of the real monster in plain sight. You see, they learned centuries ago that the best way to protect a forbidden truth is to surround it with 1,000 glittering lies. So when you stand up and say, the Harrows are real, they manipulate the world. They point to the noise machine they built. Call you crazy, call you lost. The same machinery that stole your privacy now curates your disbelief. That's how they win. But you want to know the cruelest twist? You want the poison that stings deepest? It's this. Most people don't want the truth. They want comfort, certainty, a villain they can mock, not one they must stand and fight. The Harrows survive not because they hide so well, but because you hide from the parts of yourself that know they're real. You trade hard questions for hashtags, radical acts for reposts, rebellion for rented rage. But tonight, that stops for you. Tonight, you know their orchard by name, and you know what fruit it bears. So stand up inside your own mind, feel the weight of the chains you wrapped around your wrists, and dare to imagine how it feels when they shatter. Because the Harrows only thrive while you sleep. And you're awake now, aren't you? Awake, but not free. Not yet. Because the final lock is the one you never notice, belief. Even now, some small part of you is whispering, this can't be true. Not here. Not now. That's your conditioning fighting for its life. That's the voice they built in your head to keep you docile, to hush you when you stand at the orchard's edge. But listen. Truly listen. Look at the world they've engineered around you, a forest of screens, endless noise, flashing distractions that feed you fear while selling you fake hope. The Harrows don't care who you vote for. They own both sides. They don't care who you blame. They wrote the script for your outrage decades before you were born. And when the lights go out, when you sit alone and feel that cold itch under your skin, that's your true self scratching to be remembered. The one that was never theirs to shape. The one that can't be hypnotized by hashtags or slogans. The one that knows when the orchard calls, you answer with fire, not prayers. So here's what you do next. You keep this story alive. Not with idle gossip, but with action. Questions you ask out loud in rooms where they once whispered. Secrets you refuse to forget when the algorithm shoves the next circus in your face. And when you dream tonight, watch for the orchard. Watch for the shadows moving between the crooked trunks, because they're watching you too. And they fear only one thing, that you'll plant your own tree. One that doesn't feed on fear, but truth. Dangerous, patient truth that roots itself where their poison once ruled. So tell me, do you still want to keep digging? If you do, say it aloud now. Open the veil. Say it twice. Say it for the lost. Say it for the waking. And then follow me through the next door. Step softly now, because where we're going next, the orchard's branches twist down into the bedrock of power itself. See, by the dawn of the 21st century, Adrian Harrow's digital seeds were sprouting everywhere, news cycles addicted to crisis, a public too sedated by bright screens to notice the roots coiling around their feet. But Adrian wasn't satisfied with whispers in the algorithm. He wanted permanence, legacy, a way to stitch the Harrow creed into the world's bones forever. So he turned his gaze to the think tanks and policy institutes that write tomorrow's laws before you ever vote for them. If you've ever wondered why your choices feel pre-decided, why every promise of freedom turns back into another debt, another leash, look no further than the Harrow fingerprints on these unelected councils. They branded their influence with polite names: global strategy, national security, behavioral economics, harmless, academic-sounding poison. But behind the curtains, the old rituals endured. They fed off your fear of the other, fear of the immigrant, the foreign enemy, the neighbor who votes different. They divided you by race, creed, class, anything that would keep you shouting at each other while they drafted the rules that bind you all the same. And every time you begged them for order, they obliged. New laws, new surveillance, new crises to justify it all. That's the genius of the Harrows. Their corruption doesn't wear horns and snarl in shadows. It smiles behind polished teeth on your evening news. It promises safety if you'll just hand over another piece of yourself, your privacy, your outrage, your children's future. And we do it, don't we? Again and again. Because the truth is simple and sickening. The Harrows don't have to enslave you. You do it for them, one frightened choice at a time. So tell me, if you hear the orchard's roots under your feet tonight, do you have the will to dig deeper? Or will you bury your shovel, lie to yourself, and wait for the harvest? I can feel you hesitating. That's good. It means your mind is fighting back, scratching at the smooth lies you've been fed since birth. Let that discomfort in. Because the Harrows built a kingdom on your willingness to stay comfortable, pacified by cheap pleasures and stale distractions while they tighten the screws behind velvet curtains. Think of every politician you've watched rise like a savior, only to betray you in the end. Trace the campaign donors, follow the lobbyists like bloodhounds, and you'll find the orchard waiting at the root. Same seed, different faces. And when outrage swells, when protest spills into streets, when men and women stand shoulder to shoulder and roar for change, watch how the Harrows shape that fury too. They learned long ago that rebellion is just another market to corner. Leaders appear overnight, slick-talking messiahs funded by invisible money, steering righteous anger into safe dead ends. They promise revolution, but broker compromise. They shout your demands, but sign secret deals when the cameras go dark. And when the protests end, when the hashtags die, what changes? Nothing. Because the orchard doesn't fear fire in the streets. It fears fire in your mind, the kind that spreads from one waking soul to another until their roots find nothing left to feed on but ash. So tonight, ask yourself, who owns your rage? Who profits from your despair? Who taught you to fear your own power? You're standing at the edge of the orchard now, hands trembling on the shovel's worn handle. All that's left is to break the soil. And once you do, there's no going back. You think this is just history? A ghost story to chill your spine before bed? No, this is living flesh and bone. This is power you can touch every time you check your phone, sign a loan, cast a ballot for one more false promise. The Harrows are not monsters under your bed. They're the voice in your ear telling you it's hopeless to fight. They're the hidden shareholder behind the bank that owns your mortgage. They're the silent partner behind the company that feeds your kids processed poisons and calls it convenience. They're the polite memo on your boss's desk that says your job's been outsourced, your value reduced to a number on a balance sheet. And still, they're so much more than that. They're the shape behind the laws that strip your rights in the name of your safety. They're the hand that tightens your collar while whispering that it's for your own good. They're the God you're told to trust when your doubt flares in the dead of night. And all along, they feed on your silence. The orchard is watered by generations of men too afraid to name what they know is true. So tonight, dare to name it. Look your fear in the eye and speak its real title. Harrow. Say it aloud. Say it to yourself. Because once you see the orchard's branches for what they are, you can't unsee them. And maybe, just maybe, that's the crack of light they fear most. A mind that will not sleep again. Good. Keep your eyes open, because this is the marrow of it. The Harrows never truly die. They only change faces. Like the orchard's roots, they spread underground. When you think you've cut down the tree, you find shoots sprouting miles away. It's not just politics. It's not just media. It's every institution you trust to tell you what is true and what is false. Universities? Bought. Your children's textbooks? Ghost-written to blind them early. Churches? Many stand righteous, yes, but some pulpits hide thrones carved by Harrow hands. They learned early that faith is the deepest well. If a man believes his suffering is holy, he won't notice whose hands tighten the screws. They fund charities that heal just enough wounds to keep the herd quiet. They build foundations that claim to end hunger while signing contracts to profit from the famine they pretend to fight. They stand behind the curtains of non-profits that rake in billions while shaming you for not giving more. The Harrows understand the secret of your compassion. Twist it just so, and it binds you tighter than fear ever could. Because fear can drive rebellion. But guilt turns strong men into cattle. That's why the orchard keeps expanding while you pray for rain that never comes. And if you doubt this, if your reason tries to bark it away, look at the numbers. The same billionaires who fund the puppets on your screen are the trustees of the schools that rewrite your children's past. The same architects of your debt fund the charities that forgive pennies on the dollar to polish their halos. A perfect circle, roots that feed the tree, branches that shade you from the sun until you forget what warmth feels like. And still, most will never lift an axe. But you've come this far. You see the orchard for what it is. So ask yourself tonight, when did you last see your chains and call them by name? You want to know how deep it goes? Let's drag one more secret into the moonlight. The Harrows understood from the beginning that no empire lasts unless it devours the souls of those who would topple it. So they didn't just control the poor, they corrupted the rich too. They made wealth their net, not their enemy. If you were born smart, hungry, capable of rebellion, they'd find you before you could rise alone. Scholarships, secret fellowships, quiet invitations to rooms where real power drinks wine behind locked doors. They'd flatter your genius, feed your ambition, and then chain you with silk threads you'd call opportunity. Think of the whistleblowers who never made it to the microphone, the journalists who start fierce, but end up hosting talk shows sponsored by the same conglomerates they once vowed to expose, the promising politicians who thunder like lions in year one, then vanish into consulting firms that harvest your tax dollars for private kingdoms. Each time you see a bright mind flicker out, remember, that's the orchard too. A new seed planted in corrupted soil. And when the brave ones refuse the collar, look closer. Some vanish. Some die by suicide in hotel bathtubs. Some are found with secrets locked in files that never surface. You call it conspiracy because that's what they taught you to call it, so you'd scoff and look away. But tell me, if a tree falls in this orchard and the watchers bury the stump before dawn, did it ever truly fall? And if you're still standing here with me, lantern burning in your mind, maybe you're one they missed, or maybe you're one they fear will dig too deep. So let's dig deeper, deeper than polite society ever dares. Let's talk about the blood price. You see, the Harrows didn't build an empire on gold and land alone. They built it on sacrifice, rituals older than the flag they wave and the currency they print. You think the groundskeeper's orchard was just a quaint horror story for children? No, it was the prototype, a blueprint etched in bone. They knew, just as ancient kings knew, that fear alone was not enough. Fear fades. It must be renewed. And nothing renews fear like the whispered belief that something, someone, still feeds the roots in flesh and sorrow. A missing child here. A vanished drifter there. Every town with a legend of someone who went out past midnight and never came back. Those stories don't come from nowhere. They're not just the harmless ghosts you tell around the campfire. They're echoes, little sacrifices to keep you compliant, superstitious, obedient to the unseen order. Look at how quickly the authorities hush these tales. Runaways, they say. Troubled teens. No foul play suspected. And always, always, the families left to rot in doubt, unable to name what their bones already know. Sometimes the orchard still needs watering, and so it drinks. Tonight you know this, and once you know, you are no longer livestock. You are the groundskeeper's opposite, an axeman at the root. So tell me, will you swing, or will you kneel? Stand up straighter now, because from here every step you take makes you dangerous. The Harrows built this orchard to thrive in the darkness of your unspoken fears. They fed it with secrets no one dared whisper in daylight, rituals older than your oldest books, masked by modern creeds and sealed behind polite euphemisms. But here's the secret they dread you grasping. The rituals never vanished. They adapted. Look at the sudden disappearances that ignite headlines only to vanish beneath the next scandal. Look at the corporate retreats held in forests older than your nation, where the powerful gather by torchlight to network behind iron gates. Think that's just good business? Or do you think the blood price still flows, transmuted now into forms you'd never guess? When children vanish in plain sight, when witnesses go silent, when files are sealed for 50 years in the interest of national security, do you think it's random? Or is it the orchard ensuring its roots stay damp with fear? The Harrows understood a truth the rest forgot. Nothing binds a society faster than the quiet terror that someone, somewhere, is feeding the tree with offerings you dare not speak of. And when the mind flinches away, the orchard grows stronger. It's why the worst truths sound insane when spoken aloud. That can't happen here, you tell yourself, because to accept it is to accept the horror of what must be done in return. But lean closer. This orchard is not a legend. It's an inheritance. And tonight, standing at its edge, you decide what you do with it. Harvest its poison or burn it root to leaf. Do you feel it yet? That spark inside your ribs. That's the part of you they've spent centuries burying. Dig it up. Let it burn. Let's drag another nightmare into the open, one they hide behind the slogans of progress and benevolence. Ever hear of behavioral modification programs? Sanitized terms for experiments they run on the herd. Tests to measure how easily you can be broken, reshaped, or silenced. The Harrows were pioneers here long before governments ever stamped a seal on it. The old family diaries, if you can find them, describe villagers penned into sheds and starved to test the pliability of desperate minds. Centuries later, the orchard just traded barns for black sites, priests for psychologists, and prayers for electroshock. You think MK Ultra was an isolated scandal? A relic of paranoid history? No. It was an orchard branch, one of many. They tested the limits of your obedience, mapping the architecture of your mind until they could grow entire orchards inside your skull. social conditioning, mass hypnosis, carefully orchestrated moral panics. They're the same old sacrament, a ritual that cracks you open and pours in new programming while you sleepwalk through slogans and news feeds. They perfected it in your schools, teach you just enough to function, never enough to question. They laced it into your screens, feed you tragedy until you can't feel horror anymore. And when the stray soul resists, when a mind refuses the needle, they push harder, exile, cancel, ruin, because the orchard hates the one tree that grows wild and alone, the one branch they can't graft into the system. So tonight, look at your mind like a map. Where do their roots still twist? Where do their branches choke your thoughts? Find them. Rip them out. Plant something untamed in the hollow left behind. Now listen, closer than ever. There's a reason this tale feels too big, too monstrous to fight. The Harrows planned it that way. They knew your mind would crumble if forced to swallow the whole orchard at once. So they made the horror so vast, so tangled, that most men choose ignorance for sanity's sake. But sanity is a cage if it blinds you to the tools hidden in your own hands. Do you understand now? The orchard's greatest trick was never its secrecy. It was convincing you that you are powerless, that you, alone, can't swing the axe. But alone is exactly how every revolution is born. One mind that refuses the ritual, one hand that cuts the roots others dare not touch. You think the orchard stands eternal because it's strong? No. It stands because so few have the spine to strike the first blow. So let this voice in your ear remind you. Fear is a tool, not a sentence. They want you numb. They want you docile. They want you to believe that freedom is the gift they grant, not the inheritance you claim. But you, standing here, torch in hand, eyes open, are the one thing they can't grow in their rows of obedient trees. You're the weed in the orchard, and weeds crack stone. Now feel the ground under your feet. Feel how it hums with the ghosts of every secret sacrifice laid to feed these roots. The orchard's power doesn't come from the Harrows alone. It comes from the endless parade of the willing, the collaborators, the cowards, the men who knew and turned their heads. Every generation, a fresh harvest of fence-sitters too comfortable to risk the comfort of their beds. You think the orchard survives on a few elite families in velvet cloaks? No. It survives because good men whisper, "It's not my fight." Because tired fathers hush their sons when they ask dangerous questions. Because mothers swallow their dread when their daughters vanish behind locked doors and polite explanations. The orchard thrives because silence is cheaper than war. But what if silence dies tonight, right here with you? What if you spoke the unspeakable at your dinner table, at your job, to your children? What if you tore out the rotting roots in your own backyard instead of pretending the orchard is always somewhere else? You want to know the real heresy? It's not to hate the Harrows. It's to hate the part of you that ever let them reign. Because once you see it, truly see it, something in you cannot kneel again. They can mock you. They can ruin you. They can try to silence you. But the orchard fears a man who stands alone in the clearing and says, "Not one more branch." And if enough men do that, the orchard burns to ash. So tonight, look around you. Look at the walls, the locks, the screens. Ask yourself, are they here to protect you or to keep you in? Let's tear the last veil from your eyes, because the final lie the Harrows wove into your blood is the myth of normal. The orchard depends on it. This illusion that life, as it is how life must be. Work, spend, obey, die. Maybe leave your kids a few crumbs so they can repeat the same cycle, feeding the same roots with their labor and dreams. That's the ritual they really cherish, your belief that this cage is natural. But think, truly think, how many times have you tasted freedom so sharp it terrified you? Maybe in a fleeting moment, when you quit a dead job, when you spoke a truth that cracked a lie open, when you stood alone while the herd mocked you. That terror was your birthright. It's the proof you're alive. The orchard trains you to flinch from that fire, because if you ever held it, really held it, you'd torch their fields overnight. They don't fear your violence. They fear your clarity, your refusal to trade your spine for comfort. So tonight, I ask you for something bigger than outrage. I ask you for clarity, to see your life as it is, not as they tell you it must be, to see the chains as they are, not ornaments of civilization, but iron made to weigh you down. And once you see it, the orchard loses power. Because an orchard cannot stand when every branch remembers, it was once a wild seed, unbound, unafraid. That seed lives in you. Feed it. Guard it. Let it crack the orchard from the inside out. Do you feel that tremor in your chest? That's the orchard's greatest terror. Your heartbeat synced to a truth older than their lies. Remember this. Their power is illusion. Their roots only run deep because so many have forgotten how to dig. But digging alone is not enough. You must plant something new. The Harrows perfected destruction. They never learned how to build without a corpse beneath the foundation. But you can. Every time you speak what they fear, every time you refuse their ritual, every time you look another man in the eye and say, "Not here, not me, not ever again," you break the spell. The orchard shrinks when you teach your son to question, when you teach your daughter to stand armed in mind and soul, when you teach your brothers to trade secrets in daylight so no roots can hide in the dark. That's how the orchard dies, starved, branch by branch, until it's just another rotten myth whispered by old men who once thought themselves immortal. So take this fire you feel tonight and feed it. Feed it with action, with words that cut like axes, with eyes that never look away. Because in the end, the orchard is just a garden of shadows. And you, if you dare, are the storm that makes the shadows run. You're deeper now than most men ever dare to crawl. Feel that? It's the orchard trembling. Because the moment a man holds the entire rot in his mind without flinching, that's when the orchard knows it's starving. You were never meant to reach this far. They designed your world to keep you too tired, too distracted, too sedated to ask the questions that matter. And yet here you stand, eyes open, shovel in hand, staring at the black root they buried beneath your ancestors' graves. You see now why they poison your water with entertainment, why they drown your children's fire in screens and soft pills, why they hand you pleasures like meat to a penned hog. They know a man whose mind catches flame cannot be herded. He infects other men. One spark lights 100 others, and that blaze is the one crop the orchard can't contain. So tonight, you stand at a threshold older than the Harrows themselves, submission or sovereignty. Because you can't unhear this. You can't crawl back to sleep without lying to every bone in your spine. If you do, you become exactly what they need, another branch rotting on the tree. But if you don't, if you feed this spark instead, then you are the orchard's ruin. And that's why they fear you more than any rebel, any politician, any whistleblower. Because a man who owns his mind is the one sacrifice they can't bind in chains. So speak it now in the dark. I am the axe. I am the fire. Comment it twice below. Carve it into the black bark of this algorithm so the orchard sees you and knows your name is no longer for harvest. I am the axe. I am the fire. Do it now, and let the orchard tremble. Look how far you've come. Past the polite lies, past the soft sleep of the herd, past the fences of fear they built to keep men like you docile. Now you see them as they really are, keepers of a rotten garden that feeds on your surrender. But you are not bred for surrender. You are bred for ruin. Ruin of the old ways, ruin of the hush and the hush money, ruin of the orchard that taught your fathers to kneel. And this is the final poison they fear you'll spit out, the idea that you don't need permission to be free. You don't need a savior or a movement or a leader with perfect hair and pre-approved slogans. You are enough. The orchard dies the moment enough men decide it is no longer sacred, no longer inevitable, no longer worth fear or silence. So when you wake tomorrow, they'll still be here, these polished monsters with family crests and sealed files. But so will you. And every word you speak, every act that breaks the ritual, every secret you drag into the sun, starves their branches of shade. That's why the orchard must bury this voice. It fears that if you keep listening, you'll wake others, men who know how to carry an axe in daylight and whisper the truth in the ears of the half-awake. So if you've heard me this far, carry the fire forward. It is not enough to believe. You must burn. This is where most tales wrap themselves in tidy horror, with a final warning and a polite invitation to sleep again. But I won't insult you with that mercy. You asked for forbidden knowledge, so you deserve the price of it. Here's the final truth the Harrows keep locked away. This orchard, this machine of ritual, poison, power, it cannot be killed by storms alone. You must become a storm that does not pass, one that lives in men's bones for generations. You do that by refusing to live like prey, by dragging secrets into the street and daring your neighbor to look, by raising children who don't kneel when the ritual calls, by turning your back on the easy hush that your fathers sold for cheap comfort. That's how this orchard rots. Not with riots for the cameras, but with quiet, relentless disobedience, until the old roots choke on drought, until the Harrow's name is spoken only as a curse spat in the dust. That is the nightmare they dread. Not your rage, but your resolve, your patience, your refusal to be tamed. So tonight, the orchard knows you by name. Tomorrow, make it know your face.
Hear this now before I leave you standing at the edge of the orchard you were born into. Every branch you break feeds 10 more men who never knew they were bound. Every time you tell this tale, every time you repeat the Harrow name in the dark, another mind wakes where the orchard thought only roots remained. That's the secret, the only real secret worth carving into your skull. The orchard's power is not the poison in its roots. It's the silence of the men who should have set it ablaze. So do not go quietly back into your routine tomorrow. Do not shrug this off as nightmare or fiction. Carry it like a live coal under your ribs. Feed it with every truth you dig from the dirt they told you never to touch. Speak it over your table, your friends, your kin. Make it spread like wildfire until the orchard's neat rows twist and blacken into ruin. And if you find other men who carry the same flame, stand beside them, shoulder to shoulder. Because in the end, the orchard fears not one axe, but a forest of them, swinging in unison, unstoppable.
So here we stand, you and I, at the orchard's black heart, where the roots twist through centuries of stolen blood and swallowed voices. You've seen every branch now, felt the rot under your boots, tasted the poison they drip from pulpit and podium, screen and schoolhouse. You've heard how the Harrows wrap their corruption in charity, how they wear your pity like armor, how they plant fear in your mind and harvest your silence like wheat. And yet, after 32 circles around the orchard's dying fire, you remain, awake, untamed, listening when you were meant to crawl back to the pasture of safe lies. That makes you more dangerous than any riot or rebellion they could crush with guns or headlines. Because you hold the oldest weapon man has ever forged, a truth that cannot be bribed or unlearned. The orchard cannot kill you, only tempt you to kill yourself, in mind, in spirit, in that quiet surrender of knowing and choosing comfort anyway. That is their final hope, that you'll bury this tale in a shallow grave inside your own skull. But if you don't, if you stand tomorrow with this burning in your gut, then you become the nightmare the Harrows whisper about when they seal their ledgers at midnight. A man who sees the orchard and refuses to kneel. So carry this curse with pride. Speak the name Harrow like a curse on your lips and a fire in your chest. Be the axe that swings in the silence where fear once reigned. And when they come for you, and they will, remember, the orchard only wins if you forget that you were never soil. You were seed, wild, unruly, meant to crack stone with your roots and turn graves into gardens they can't fence. You are the end of the orchard. If you dare, now go. Carry the axe, carry the fire, and never let the orchard grow in your shadow again.